The Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Gilad Erdan, put on quite the performance yesterday at the UN General Assembly. It was completely ludicrous, frankly, utterly humiliating, but also provided an extremely appropriate visual metaphor. Let's just have a little look, shall we?
This is You are shredding the UN Charter with your own hands. Yes, that's what you're doing. Shredding the UN Charter. Shame on you.
You're right, Gilad. Would you like a sit down? Maybe a glass of water. You often get a bit excitable when you don't have a decent night's rest. Maybe a little lie down. Anyway, this sort of performance was put on during a debate by the UN General Assembly about whether Palestine should be granted full membership of the United Nations, giving it new rights and privileges. Before yesterday, it's been a non-member observer state for the last 12 years. Now, I said this speech by the Israeli ambassador was an appropriate visual metaphor because he was accusing the vast majority of the United Nations of shredding the UN Charter, while he himself was shamelessly and unapologetically shredding the UN Charter in front of the entire world. This is known as projection, which has been a pillar of Israel's strategy, not least since it unleashed a genocidal onslaught against the Palestinian people in October 2023. That is constantly accusing others of doing what you are clearly doing yourself in full view of the world, indeed in front of cameras. Now, it is worth noting that since October, Israel has butchered around 200 UN members of staff, the biggest slaughter of UN staff in such a short period of time since the United Nations was founded in the ruins of the post-war world back in 1945. And Israel has violated numerous UN resolutions, not least, of course, relating to its treatment, its subjugation of the Palestinian people. Let's just hear one last other contribution from this fascinating character.
Today, with sick and twisted irony, the very body established to prevent evil is now welcoming a terror state into its ranks. What would Churchill say if he were alive today? What would Roosevelt think? They are turning in their graves, This week, only this week, Israel commemorated Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. And it is during our sacred week that this shameless body has chosen to reward modern-day Nazis with rights and privileges. As Israelis mourn the Jewish babies burned in the crematoria, you here at the UN usher in the collaborators of the Israeli babies burned on October 7th. How can you be so blind?
Well, just on Winston Churchill, whatever else you might think of the guy, he's not exactly the sort of guy you want as your go-to reference on questions of anti-Semitism. I mean, just in terms of anti-Semitism, Churchill invoked, back in 1920, the classic anti-Semitic trope of the Jewish Bolshevik international conspiracy. He despised Bolshevism. He pointed to the fact that most leading Bolsheviks were Jewish, arguing that the principal inspiration driving power for Bolshevism came from what he described as the Jewish leaders. Now, later, on the question of Palestine itself, he made explicitly racist justifications for the fate of the Palestinian people, saying that, I do not admit that a wrong has been done to those people by the fact that a stronger race, a higher grade race, or at any rate a more worldly wise race, to put it that way, has come in and taken their place. I do not admit it. And he alluded to the fate of those he described as the Red Indians, which he approved of for the same reasons. Yeah, I'm sure he is spinning in his grave, but do you know what? Good. He then invoked the Holocaust, of course, the greatest single crime in human history, which I would note was perpetrated by Europeans, specifically Germany and its wartime allies, not by the Palestinian people, who have been forced to pay the price for what Germany and its allies did. A point inadvertently made there by, of course, the Israeli ambassador in his speech. He describes Palestine as modern-day Nazis. Frankly, a disgrace. Firstly, you can and should condemn war crimes committed by Hamas without belittling the attempt by the Nazis to exterminate by industrialized means a defenseless civilian population based on disturbed, unhinged conspiracism. And secondly, the official government of the state of Palestine, recognized by the international community, is not Hamas, as the ambassador knows full well. But we, of course, have repeatedly heard the likes of Israeli Finance Minister, for example, Bezalel Smotrich, describe the civilian populations of Gaza and the West Bank as Nazis. That itself is genocidal rhetoric. Describing civilian populations as Nazis is to state they are fair game to be targeted. Now, the ambassador goes on to refer to Israeli babies burned on October 7th. Here again, we see on full display the strategy of the Israeli state to repeatedly refer to atrocities which simply did not happen on October 7th. Look, many civilians were killed and taken hostage by Hamas and other armed Palestinian groups, all clearly war crimes. I've been very clear about that from the start. One Israeli baby was killed on October 7th, shot through the door of a safe room. Obviously something to be condemned without reservation, along, I would say, with the 36 Israeli children, that is those under 18, killed on 7th of October. Every one of those killings is a terrible crime. It is simply not true that Israeli babies were burned to death on 7th of October. That is a lie, and we know that it's a lie because I'm referring to Israeli official statistics. By contrast, huge numbers of Palestinian babies have actually been burned to death. What a thing to have to say. What a thing to actually have to come out and say. It's true. It's just, you say these things, but no words can do justice to what I'm actually describing. Like, you see, some of you may have your own babies. You see babies, people, your friends, your relatives, their little babies. So many babies like that have been burned to death by the Israeli state. How do you even absorb that? Around 15,000 plus Palestinian children have been killed. Now, it's not exactly clear how many of the 15,000 plus Palestinian children have been slaughtered as babies, but clearly it's a very significant number, isn't it? Some buried under rubble and suffocated, some burned to death, some of them immediately killed by the power of explosives, the fire and the rubble falling on them. Some slowly cooked to death, some slowly suffocated to death. Hideous thing to have to say that, isn't it? I don't want to say that kind of thing. I don't want to talk about it. I find it horrific to talk about. But we can't shy away from the reality of what's been unleashed against the Palestinians by the Israeli state. So this really is an example of projection, because the Israeli state has burned to death huge numbers of Palestinian babies. Indeed, since that speech, there's every chance other young Palestinians have been burned to death. Now, you might ask, why do they keep referring to false atrocities when actual atrocities did happen on 7th of October? You can think, what's the strategy there? It's very straightforward. Because you see, because the Israeli state went on and knew it was going to go on to and has killed far more people and will kill far more people than were killed by Hamas and other armed groups on 7th of October, they had to make the argument that the way that Israelis were killed is just infinitely worse and more sadistic and monstrous. So their form of violence is unhinged and sadistic because they're like animals, whereas the way we kill people, that's humane. That is the point. That's the point of this whole strategy. And then you think, because what's worse than like burning babies to death or beheading babies, the other lie which we kept hearing circulated? Anyone who does that, you just think they're a monster. So they had to make a distinction between the forms of violence on 7th of October and the forms of violence the Israeli state went on to inflict. And there's not enough of a distinction between the way that Israeli civilians were killed and the way Palestinians have been killed. That's their problem. So then they have to go, well, actually, this is why we're morally superior. But it's a lie. And they should refer to war crimes that were actually committed, but they keep referring to war crimes that weren't. That's the reason. Now, the Israeli state has committed some of the worst atrocities of the 21st century. Through its murderous bombing campaign, shelling, bullets, deliberate starvation, the deprivation of the basic essentials of life, the mass destruction of the medical system. We really could go on. What is clear is that Israel, as currently constituted, will never accept Palestinian national self-determination, which condemns those Palestinians under its domination, many millions, between the river Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea to eternal occupation and apartheid, or indeed to the fate of genocide. Now, as a palate cleanser, after listening to this individual, let's listen to Palestine's UN ambassador, Riyad Mansour.
Against all odds, we survived. Our flag flies high and proud in Palestine and across the globe and on the campus of Columbia University. It has become a symbol raised by all those who believe in freedom and is just rule, by all those who can no longer stand idly by in the face of such utter injustice. It is true that we will not disappear, but the lives lost cannot be restored.
Well, I found it very emotional to listen to, and I'm sure some of you teared up. I did when I first listened to that. The Palestinian people have faced a deliberate attempt to snuff them out, and the solidarity they have received has clearly meant a huge amount, beyond words, to them in their darkest hour. That alone is reason for us to keep yelling as loud as we can. Now let's hear how he went on to sum up in that speech.
In simple words, voting yes is the right thing to do. And I can assure you, you and your country for years to come will be proud to have stood for freedom, justice, and peace in this darkest hour. As everyone is saying, free Palestine, and peace for all. And I repeat, free Palestine and vote yes for the resolution, and I thank you so much.
Note the applause he got there. Free Palestine indeed. Now, the UN General Assembly then voted. Let's have a watch.
The United Nations. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution A/ES10/L30/revision 1, please signify. Those against and abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/ES10/L30/revision 1, entitled Admission of New Members to the United Nations. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine. 142.
Nice applause at the end there. So 143 nations voted in favour, just 9 voted against, and just 25 abstained. I'm sure you'll be shocked to learn that of the 9 countries who voted against, one of them was the United States of America, as well, obviously, as Israel, shamefully alongside the now right-wing-led Latin American nation of Argentina, and tiny nations like Micronesia, which has a population of just over 100,000, and Nauru, population 12,000. Amongst the 25 nations which abstained, the UK was one of them. What a disgrace. Total disgrace. Not least given, not to belabour this point, but without Britain, we wouldn't be in this mess. Another great victory there for the British Empire, which we're condemned to live in perpetually. Now, Israel is a rogue state. You can see that from the maths. It gets away with its behaviour because of the patronage and support of the global north, principally the United States, the last remaining superpower, albeit a power in decline, partly because of this kind of thing. Now, an obvious response here is, well, there's many other terrible regimes on earth, and that is true. But it has long been the case that racist domination has been understood as a particular horror in its own right. Hence the particular opposition to apartheid South Africa, when again, there were no shortage of other terrible regimes on earth at the time. And that form of racist domination is so dangerous because, of course, it can lead to genocide, as we can see today. The fact is, as I will keep saying, Israel's lost. It has lost. It has lost public opinion across the world, not simply in states which long rejected it, but in the states which arm and support it. Now, the US may have opposed full membership for Palestine, but public opinion in the US has swung dramatically against Israel and will continue to do so. The US will find it increasingly very difficult to continue its policy of uncritical support for Israel, and therefore Israel will find it increasingly very difficult to continue to subject the Palestinian people to these horrors. And beneath all these theatrics, the Israeli state and its representatives know it. They know where this is all headed. There will be a just peace based on equality for all. That will happen in the lifetimes of many of you watching and listening. The real question is how many more have to suffer and be slaughtered before that happens. Please like and subscribe. Do leave your comments. Love to hear what you think. Share this video. Help us take on the pro-war media at patreon.com/owners84. Listen to the podcast. I'll speak to you soon.